chapter 4, I've got some information that is additional to the textbook in these lectures, all right? So use the chapter and the lecture notes when you're studying, okay? So for today, we're going to look at prenatal development, and on Monday, we will look at postnatal development. Oops, it would help if I started the recording. There we go.
Dr. Wall, see for the PowerPoints, 4B, I don't know if anyone else, but when I tried to open it up, it came up with chapter 6.
Oh,
I don't know why.
Yeah, I tried to do it.
yeah,
Same problem.
you three are such
What?
What?
I had the same problem.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Hey, good. All right, can you drop me an email and remind me?
Yeah, okay.
Thank you. And I will double check it. All right, so we're looking at growth and aging. So we're looking at an individual constraint, all right? On our triangle, go back to our constraints triangle. We're going to be talking about the top point. And the key point when we're looking at prenatal is that the rate of growth that we see from conception through infancy is faster than we ever see at any other time in life. All right? So everything is developing very, very rapidly. That puts it at a little bit of risk, as we'll see. All right? So we have both genetic and extrinsic environmental variables that influence growth and aging in this time period. Okay? The patterns that we see, we have talked about before with regards to skill development. Very similar idea when we look at the development of growth and aging. All right? We have universality. So humans, if they are typically developing, develop 2 legs, 2 arms, a brain, a stomach, etc. Right? But we have a lot of individual variation, so specificity to an individual person. Okay? So hearts aren't all the same size. Even if you look at women, all women's hearts aren't the same size, and they're all generally smaller than men's hearts. Okay? So, if we understand what we're seeing, then that allows us to, as teachers, be developmentally appropriate. All right? That means that given any individual difference in their constraints, we can make a task achievable for that person. Right? So it might seem a little bit odd that we're looking at prenatal information today, okay? But we all came from that. And what happens during that period can influence what you see later on, and therefore what you have to teach and work with later on in life. All right? So having a very brief understanding of development at this age is important. All right, so early development in the womb is under the control of initially the genes, all right? So the hereditary aspect, what does the baby get from mum and dad? Okay? And the genes determine or organize normal development for that child. Okay? But if there's an error in a gene, then that child may inherit something abnormal. Okay? But we can't just look at the genetic material, right? Because this baby isn't growing in a little isolated box, right? The mum is engaging in activity in the outside world, and the environment that the mum provides for the baby internally is also a factor. All right, so the embryo initially and then the fetus are very, very sensitive to extrinsic factors. All right, so it could be, as I said, the environment within the amniotic sac, or it could be substances or nutrients that are being passed to the baby via the mum's bloodstream. All right, and these external factors interact with the genetic material to drive development. All right? Hopefully positive, usually positive. All right? When we see an atypical individual, they stand out, and so we tend to kind of expand not the importance, that doesn't sound right, but expand their role. But actually there's very few atypical people when you look at the human population on the planet as a whole. So positive influences for the baby could be the mum's nutrition. Negative effects on the baby could be the mum catches some kind of virus that manages to pass through the placenta and get to the baby. All right. Brandon, tell me if you can still see this if I turn this front light off, because they can't see the picture.
Yeah, it should be good.
Is it okay?
Yeah.
All right. All right, so the first phase of development is the embryo. The embryonic period lasts from conception up to 8 weeks. All right? Conception occurs in the fallopian tubes. Takes 3 to 4 days for that egg then to move to the uterus, and the placenta attaches during week 2 to 3. Okay. So what initially happens is that the cells start to differentiate and split. Oh! And split. All right, so we start with one cell, and then very, very quickly we have a lot more than one cell. All right, so by 4 days we've got about 90 cells. Right? So they're rapidly dividing to start to create a little person. Right? The heartbeat starts around 4 weeks. And the limbs are roughly formed, so they don't look like limbs, they're little limb buds, they look like little blobs on the side of a slightly bigger blob, but they're the start of limbs. Right? Organs are developing. We see the thyroid gland, we start to see shadows where the lungs will be and the stomach will be. And by 8 weeks, at the point where we transition from embryo to fetus, we're seeing something that is recognizably human if it continues to develop. Okay. So this is 5.5 weeks. And it's a good indication of that Keffler caudal development that we talked about way back at the beginning of the semester. Right, remember cephalocaudal is head to toe, proximodistal is midline outwards. All right, so here you can see, here's the head to toe, right? Lots more development going on at the head of the brain at this point. Right, you're starting to see an eye, starting to see a spinal cord. Here, this little paddly thing, that's the start of the arm and the hand. And down here, you can't see it very well, there's the start of the foot and the leg. Right? The foot paddle is less developed than the hand paddle. And the organs, midline, are more developed than the fingers and the toes, distal. Right? So keep the laws of direction in mind. Okay? So at 5.5 weeks, it's like a big raisin, a large raisin, right? So not much to go on yet. At 6 weeks, this one is a nice view, shows you the amniotic sac. So the baby is getting some nutrition from the amniotic sac. And you've got a very good view of the development of the spinal cord here. Here are the arm buds, here are the leg buds. Still an embryo, not a fetus yet. So now we get to 8 weeks, all right? And we see some interesting things beginning to happen. Because so far, this little clump of cells is like a relatively stiff piece of jelly, right? There's no bones yet, okay? So if we look at the scan for 8 weeks, these shadows in the middle of the leg and in the middle of the feet, and if you were closer you could see some in the toes. These shadows are called primary ossification centers, right? So the tibia, the leg bone, is just kind of cartilage. It's not stiff yet. The primary ossification center is the point from which it starts to lay down mineral, so calcium, phosphorus, etc., and starts to create a hard skeletal structure. Okay? So here, you can see some in the feet, all right? Primary ossification centers, points from which starting to calcify the bones.
Was that the answer to the pretest? The fetal development? Because I put that in as it was wrong.
It will often say it's wrong because it's blackboard. That's why you have, whoa!
Okay, cool.
Hey.
That's what they pay me for. Don't worry about it. I will correct them all this afternoon. All right, so at 8 weeks, we technically transition from what is called an embryo to a fetus, and it is a fetus until birth. All right? And so what we see during this time is still rapid continued growth. And growth is occurring in 2 ways. Right? The first way is hyperplasia. Hyperplasia means we're increasing the actual number of cells that are within the body. And we're increasing, obviously, very different types of cells. Some of them are going to be skin, some of them are going to be bone, some of them are going to be muscle, some of them are going to be digestive tract, some will be brain, right? The other way we see growth is hypertrophy, which means the cells that are being laid down are then able to grow in size. We have our directional laws. We grow from head to toe, we grow from midline out. So directional laws of development, and they apply to skill development as well as growth. So when we look at skills, some of what we see when we look at our MSU chart, we go, okay, they go from stage 1 to stage 2 to stage 3, is due to directional laws. Right? And cephalical and proximodistal are going on at the same time. It's not like they do one and then the other. They occur together. Okay? Some cells have the capability to take on new functions, so they might change plan partway through. In the future, as a baby or an adult, then a lot of the cells can't change function. Luckily, the central nervous system can. So if we have an accident or a stroke and part of the brain is damaged, often, not always, but often, another part of the brain can take over the job that the damaged area used to do. Can't do it as efficiently often, but it can still function. All right? Bone can't be anything else. Bone is not plastic. Right? Muscle is not plastic. It can't. A muscle cell can't become something else or do another muscle's job. All right? So the cells differentiate very early in the womb, all right, and they migrate to the area in the body where they're going to develop into what type of cell they are. So, are they going to be a little toenail? Are they going to be a hair follicle on your hair? Right? What are they going to be? So they have a very specialized function and they will move to that area to fulfill that function. So 11 weeks starts to get exciting because now we're starting to see legs and arms, we can see a stomach, we can see the eye. Okay. The yolk sac now, they're not using the yolk sac for nutrition anymore by 11 weeks. That means that all their nourishment is coming from mum via the placenta. So that has the most influence at this point in time on their growth, right? What kind of nutrition are they receiving from mum? So all their oxygen is coming via the placenta, all their nutrients are coming via the placenta in the maternal blood. The maternal blood and the baby's blood intermingle at the placenta, and nutrients and oxygen are passed across. So generally this is great, okay, because most mums are well nourished, right? And they're able to pass that nourishment on to the baby. But if mum has what we call poor maternal health status, so if she is very low socioeconomic status and she doesn't eat good quality foods, or she doesn't eat enough food, right? Then there starts to become a competition for resources, right? Does the body, does the brain feed the mum or feed the baby? Right? Generally it will feed the mum, because the mum is salvageable, the baby's not salvageable, and plus she can have another baby. So typically, the body will make sure that the mum survives. Okay? So if the mum has a safe food supply, if she has good quality prenatal care, and if her risk of infection is low, then the baby's outcomes are likely to be very good. Right? But if mum, as I said, if mum is lower socioeconomic status, or if she's not in America and she's growing up in the bush in outback of Australia or something, right? Then chances are the baby, if it survives, will have a lower birth weight than is average, right? And lower birth rates put the baby at increased risk for infection and other things after they're born, right? Brain development, cognitive development, all kinds of things. Okay? So mum's health status, mum's ability to be healthy is crucial to a good developing baby and a healthy developing baby. Questions? All right, so we're going to look at what can go wrong. And it's a little dire, and it starts to sound a little bit terrifying. Remember, it's a very small percentage of the population, right? So as we said earlier, the source of abnormal development could be the genetic material the baby inherited from the parents, or it could be extrinsic factors that are presented to the embryo or the fetus. So, the genetic abnormality can be something that is carried by the parent, right? Or it can be, sadly, a genetic mutation at the point that the egg and the sperm join. Right? So it might be something that was never predictable. Or it can be something that you know is a risk. Okay? Particularly if both parents carry the gene for it. Alright? So effects on growth and development are variable depending on what the problem is. Okay? Now, it can be a dominant disorder. That means it only had to be present in one parent. Or it can be a recessive disorder, which means both parents unfortunately carry the gene. And that can happen even with the statistical chance of meeting someone with the same genetic abnormality. The extrinsic factors can affect the baby via the placenta, right? So via its nourishment, or it could be physical, the actual physical environment. Okay? So when it's delivered via the placenta, so it's a virus or it's a drug or something else, that's called a teratogen. Okay? So that is teratogen. Okay, so teratogen could, as I said, could be a virus, could be a drug if mom smokes, could be chickenpox. Right, or German measles. Okay. So they get access to the baby via the placenta, and then they act as an agent that produces some malformation in the baby. Right? The external, the physical environment could be like pressure on the mum's stomach. So for example, if she had a fall and fell on her stomach, okay? Something like that. Does anybody know what's the very enjoyable thing that mums are all told they can't do once they know they're pregnant?
Drink.
Drink or smoke?
I was thinking something more physical, but yes, that is wrong.
Really?
Exercise.
They can't run.
Ooh, I hope not, but some they might be. All right, they're not supposed to sit in a hot tub because the extra heat in the hot tub affects the environment for the baby. Some mums are advised not to fly long distances, especially if they're having blood pressure issues, because the extra fluid that is created when you fly can put pressure on the baby, things like that. So that would be the physical stuff, okay? If she's a skier and she fell, right? Remember that the tissues are undergoing very, very rapid development at this time. So they're very, very sensitive to exposure to anything that is negative. Okay? So if we're talking about this idea of the teratogens, then that has two ways of playing an effect. All right? It can be that the mum is exposed to too much of the substance, or the embryo or fetus is exposed to too much of the substance. It may be they're exposed to not enough, so if they're not getting enough vitamins, for example. So the job of the placenta, other than to act as the environment where the bloodstreams meet, all right, and so oxygen and nutrition can reach the baby. The placenta is also the kind of checkpoint in the system. So it acts like a screening mesh, okay? And it screens many substances, particularly large viruses. But some viruses aren't large, some viruses are very small, right? Some drugs, the molecule in the drug that is harmful is not very large. So it can't screen everything that mum may be exposed to or may be engaging in. Okay. So X-rays is another one. Why, even if you go to the dentist, if they're doing their job right, even the dentist before they x-ray your teeth will ask you if you might be pregnant, because they won't run an x-ray if there's any risk of you being pregnant. And when we look at the effects, not all the tissues are developing at the same rate at the same time across 9 months. All right? Certain organs develop ahead of others, and tissues are developing most rapidly in different timelines. So when the teratogen is exposed to the baby, it depends which particular tissue is undergoing the most rapid development at that point in time. Okay?
I still know that.
Oh, good!
Are we stealing away? Thank you so
I'm
much.
so sorry.
You gotta go.
We're stealing
We're very
away.
glad to have you. You'll have to ask the teammates how the lecture finishes.
Oh.
Thank you. Really appreciate it.
No problem.
Where are you going?
I was.
So this figure gives you a visual description of which tissues are at risk, at the most risk, at what time. So remember we said that the first 2 weeks the placenta was not attached. So there's no risk from teratogens, at least, during the first 2 weeks after conception, because there's no direct link between the mum and the baby here. Right? Placenta is in place between weeks 2 and 3, so once we get to week 3, we start to see some risk. The dark part of the line is the period of time within the 9 months where the most risk for that particular tissue or system that's developing. Right? And the paler part of the line is the tissue is still developing now, but it's developing more slowly, and so there's less risk during this point in time. Once the bar is finished, it means that particular tissue is done developing. So anything that is coming into the system via the placenta after here isn't going to affect this. It's done. Does that make sense? Right? So our heart is done laying down new cells. Obviously the cells that are there are going to get bigger, but it's developed by the end of week 8. Right? Same with the upper limbs and lower limbs. Upper lip, so if you know anyone that was born with a cleft lip, for example, then the period of most risk for that developing was week 5 and 6. Little less risk during 7 and 8. After 8, lips are formed, so that cleft lip didn't happen after week 8. Okay? Okay, so it's pretty interesting, I think. Teeth are developing all the way through, so yet more anecdotal personal evidence. You're probably going to go, too much information, Dr. Moore. My teeth are quite yellow. My mum was given a drug when she was pregnant with me that affected the tooth enamel. So even when they bleach my teeth, they don't bleed. They don't come out like all those nice adverts where the girl walks out with that. Yeah, that doesn't happen. Right? Okay? So certain drugs can impact certain things. So remember, the effect is, when was the teratogen given? When was the baby exposed to the teratogen? Because it depends, right? And how much of that teratogen was the baby exposed to? So do I live right next door to a nuclear plant? Or did I happen to drive through a town that has a nuclear plant while I was off on my camping holiday? Okay. If the baby is small for their age at birth, right, so they have a low birth weight, then that can affect our postnatal growth and development that we're going to talk about on Monday. Right? Because if they are small for the age when they're born, so that means there's a slight difference. I can be born at 9 months. I should be 7 to 7.5 pounds. Right? That's average. I suspect the average is eking up a little bit because everybody's getting bigger. Right? The average is 7 to 7.5 pounds. Okay? So if I'm born at 9 months and I'm only 6 pounds or 5 pounds, I have low birth weight. I am small for my birth age, right? But if I was born at 7 months and I was 5 pounds, then I'm the appropriate weight for my birth age. Does that make sense? Right? So it's not the weight on its own, it's the weight in relation to how many months was of the pregnancy was the baby born at. There is a handout on Blackboard that has a lot more information about teratogens if you're interested in them. Some of the substances pregnant women are told to avoid. So, boys already came up with 2 good ones: cigarettes, smoking, and drinking alcohol.
In the hot tub.
And hot tub, yes. Right? Those are 2 big ones. Women who drink during their pregnancy, yes sir?
Well, I was just gonna ask, so you said activity, they can do that, so how long into the pregnancy, you know what I mean?
They should stay active basically all the way through to birth.
Okay,
It's how active and what, right?
gotcha.
Because, as we'll talk about, she's getting bigger and bigger and bigger. What does that do to her center of gravity? Where's her center of gravity now?
Looking forward.
Right? Outside her base of support. So her chances for tipping over as she moves further into the pregnancy get larger and larger and larger. So it's not the not moving. If a doctor says don't move, sack him, go somewhere else. Unless her blood pressure is really, really high, or she develops mummy diabetes, that's sometimes an issue, where they don't want you then to move, although that never makes sense to me. She should be moving and active the whole time. It's just what, right? You've got to switch to biking, you've got to switch to swimming, you've got to switch to things where your balance is not challenged. Okay?
Gotcha.
So, women who drink a lot during pregnancy can give birth to a baby who has fetal alcohol syndrome, right? And FAS babies tend to have small brain sizes in comparison to their body. They have, therefore, mental or cognitive deficits. They have face and eye deformation, so they have the skin under your eye tends to be exaggerated in FAS babies, so they look quite slitty-eyed almost because of this extra fold of skin that develops. And they are the couple that I would have recognized as FAS, their features tend to be quite flat as well, almost sort of Down syndrome-y, but more balanced than a Down syndrome face. They have slow growth, they're often ADHD, they have short attention spans. All right, so drinking during pregnancy, if this baby is born with fetal alcohol syndrome, that sets that child up for the rest of its life for problems. Okay. Folic acid is a supplement that if you know you're pregnant, it's likely you will be advised, especially if you are older, you'll be advised to take folic acid supplements. So there are things you can do to make as certain as you can be that the baby will be strong and healthy, and there are things that you need to not do, okay? Which involves knowing that you're pregnant, right? So that's something to think about, because if I'm a party girl and I like a drink and I don't know I'm pregnant,
Right.
I'm not going to stop drinking. Large stack of condoms in your sport bag, right, when you go away for
Big
the
stack.
Yeah.
Big stack.
Big stack. That's what we want, right? I can't take care of the baby if I don't know the baby is there, right? And the thing about the information on the teratogens is a lot of that damage, if we go back to the kind of bar chart, a lot of that damage occurs before week 8. That's only 2 months pregnant. Some people don't know they're pregnant until they're 4 months gone. You're way past being able to mitigate any of this damage. Right? You can only take care of the baby if you know the baby is there. It's a very important point. All right, so Monday we're going to start talking about postnatal development, and we're going to start with growth. All right, and we're going to talk about the big picture, which is going to be a graph that looks like a somewhat flattened S. Okay. This is our universal picture for growth postnatally. Alright? So, I'm going to start by talking about the S-shaped curve and what that means with regards to where are my growth spurts once I'm born. Okay? Alrighty. Have a lovely weekend. Use the condoms.
Everybody.